Today I want to talk to you about how I got my first Upwork job. I was exclusively working on Fiverr, which up until that point was just incredibly stressful because I was getting work, but I didn't have a lot of control over who I was working with. And so I moved to Upwork. And I just put a profile together on here, just left it for many, many months and didn't do anything with it. Upwork has a 24-hour to 48-hour onboarding process where they ask you a bunch of questions, usually just your description, adding all your work history, all that kind of stuff. It usually doesn't take very long to get through that, but that is the very first thing that you need to do in order to even have a profile on here. The second thing is making sure that your profile is at 100%. And this is one of the biggest things that people forget to do when they first started. I was also guilty of this. I put my profile together, I put a basic description, and I made my hourly rate super, super high, which I talk a little bit more about in other videos, but I barely had anything on my portfolio that was relevant to what I was trying to get. All of my naming conventions were absolutely out of control and crazy. It was just kind of a disaster from beginning to end. But what I realized as I was working through Upwork, first thing we need to do is make sure your profile is complete. I didn't even know that existed when I first got on here. And I put some stuff in here, a little bit about my portfolio, a little bit about my education history, all that stuff. But Upwork asks us to add some extra things like your skills, which are basically just keywords and tags, a little bit about your socials if you want to do that. Anything like that is going to make your profile stand out on Upwork. I had no idea that any of this stuff existed. I think I put the bare minimum, which would be the description and portfolio, and then my profile picture, which is still the picture that I had when I started. It's not a very good picture of me, but it was all I had at the time. So I just went and, I kind of called it a day. My whole thing with freelancing is to make sure that we do ready, fire, aim. But this is one of those things with Upwork specifically that is really, really important. I want you to make sure that you get this all completed so that your profile is 100%. A lot of people put profiles on Upwork, but they never get them to completion. You can still submit for jobs, even with a half completed profile, but you are excluded from search. Upwork doesn't really promote you the same way that they do with people who've actually done this. So first step, very, very important. I didn't do this, but this immediately helped me in terms of the algorithm and being seen by clients. The other thing that I did wrong when I first started on here is that my description was very, very, very long, and I had no concept of who I was talking to or why I was even talking to them. I had this full dissertation that was very, very I, me. And, I was trying to make people think that I was qualified when I had 0 testimonials at the time. Now that I've done this, and I've put this in here as an example today, I have basically very simple description. I do these things, I help with this stuff, and then these go in the description is what I help with, and then we just list out a bunch of tags, and we want to make sure that these tags are specific to what clients want us to help with so that they look at it and think, oh, that's my thing immediately. I talk a lot more about keywords and tags and algorithms and all that stuff on my channel. Bare minimum, we want a description that has what I help with and then a call to action of some kind. And a call to action in marketing is basically just a line that says, hey, please do this thing. And then if you like that thing, take this next step. And in this case, we want them to look at our portfolio and then reach out to us so that they can work with us and set up a contract. So if you're going to do nothing else, we want to make sure that we have those 2 things in there because that's a really solid description. It's going to help you get a lot more work on here. So when you're on here and you are trying to get your first testimonials, because I had no testimonials. And again, I literally just had the bare bones of a profile, which I thought my thought process was at the time, I'll just apply to jobs. Somebody's going to see my portfolio and that's going to be that. They're going to think, oh, she's a really good artist. I want to work with her. And it turns out to be a little more complicated than that. Whenever someone is on a new freelancing site and they have no reviews of how you are to work with, they have a tendency to not trust you as much, even if you have a really incredible portfolio. So I thought, oh, people are going to look at my artwork and think she's good enough to work with, even though I couldn't move my testimonials testimonials from Fiverr. I couldn't move them from anywhere else on the internet. And I had tons of them at the time, but I couldn't move them to Upwork because Upwork wants you to use Upwork and Upwork only. I made a mistake when I was first doing this. What I did when I was first looking on here is I started to analyze job listings a little bit more closely because I for months I was just frustrated spending connects, just sending proposals into the ether. And I had no idea what was wrong because I thought my portfolio would carry me through this. I reworked it many times, which is of course always the instinct. It feels like there's something wrong with portfolio or the algorithm's burying you, something like that. But I realized that it was a lot more likely that I was missing something with Upwork, and I was missing it completely. So I thought, okay, my goal is only to find testimonials, people who are going to give me testimonials on here, stuff that's not going to kill me in terms of the kind of work that I'm trying to do. It's probably not going to be the best rate, but it's going to get me what I want, which is a testimonial. So that's what I ended up doing. So I went and looked for jobs in the illustration field, which were around the budget range I was looking for. And I also talk in my other videos about how to set up filters and how to, make everything a little bit more optimized so that you're finding the right stuff. Because on Upwork in particular, you're just bombarded with stuff that's not relevant to you sometimes, and there's some ways to fix that. Definitely check out my other videos on that stuff. Let's see. So I went through all of my job listings on here, and I stopped looking for the jobs that were super high budget. I stopped looking for the ones that were super highly competitive, and I wanted stuff that was just going to get me those first couple testimonials, which is really what people need to trust you on here. So, and that's like step one. I mean, after we get our profile to 100%, we want to get to those first couple testimonials, and then we can start raising our rates. We can start talking those more competitive job listings and things like that. What happens with this is I was starting to go through job listings on here, and this is not niche specific, by the way. This is the same with graphic design. It's going to be the same in web building. It's going to be the same with virtually any niche. But if you have something specific that comes up, definitely leave it in the comments for me to look at. I would look through these job listings. 100 to 150 is kind of like the sweet spot when I'm thinking of a job listing that I'm looking for. Doesn't mean we can't go higher, but it's just a little bit easier to get some of these testimonials that way. I talk a lot more in my other videos about how to analyze a job listing. I have been accused of being super highly detail oriented and granular, and they're all correct about that. I am 100%, probably a little bit too much detail oriented. I love the fact that Upwork gives us so much information on the front end. It's not like Fiverr where you have people kind of coming in that you have never spoken to. You have no idea what they want. And I talk a lot about Fiverr, not necessarily negatively, but I did move from Fiverr to Upwork for these reasons. If I had to pick between the two, I definitely have a little bit of a bias, and I'm not going to be shy about that. So Upwork, we have so much information in front of us. I will go into how to break down a job listing in one of my other videos. But what I was looking for when I was first on here, because I completely changed my mindset, was I was just trying to find stuff that had a history of people paying you. So we want to see that they're paying you and that they leave testimonials for the freelancer. So in this case, I don't see any reviews. It's not helpful. It's in the right ballpark budget wise, but I still need a little bit more reviews. $400. 4 unique family portraits. That's not going to be out of control. Completely depends on your personal hourly rate. Basically, we want to make sure that this isn't going to kill you in terms of the workload. It's probably not perfect in terms of budget match because you're not going to go into this with a lot of negotiation because your profile is so new. What we want to do is just find something that's, for me, for example, portraits are incredibly easy for me to knock out. They're just something that I really love and enjoy. And I know that they oftentimes take me an hour, 45, sometimes 2 hours. I can get it down much, much less if I really am focused. 2 hours about is how long it takes for me to knock out a portrait. So I can look at this and know that this is not going to be too much work for me. I could probably get down to an hour and a half if I really have to. It depends on the style that they want. I'm going to look and see. We have right here an actual testimonial, so that's really good to see. We also see that they have a fixed rate budget or price for a previous contract that was for about what they're offering us currently. So that's a really good sign. I like to see that. So this would be in the ballpark of something that I would think is a really solid listing to actually apply to if you have a very new profile. I wouldn't mention that to the client. I wouldn't say something like, I have a very new profile and I'm just getting myself started on here, because as a professional, whatever you are, you probably have other work on other freelancing platforms. But because Upwork is Upwork, we have to think of Upwork as its own internal universe. So in terms of the way that they're seeing you, they think that you're a completely new, never tested freelancer. So we have to treat each thing that we go into that with that in mind. I may say something to them like, in exchange for a review at the end of the work, not a good review, by the way, we're not twisting anybody's arm, but a review at the end of the work, I will do it for this particular budget, which is exactly what they've asked for. So they have a little bit more incentive to work with you. And then they also remember that you have an interest in getting a review at the end of the job. What we want to do when we first get on Upwork is make sure that our profile is 100%. I didn't do that. It took extra time for the algorithm to figure out who I was and who to put me in front of because of that. And the other thing we want to do is not focus on the super highly competitive jobs on here, the ones that are very high budget, really difficult to get if you don't have a strong profile. And we want to switch our mindset to be a little bit more interested in people who leave reviews for freelancers generally, and then a budget that's not going to kill us in terms of the workload. And that's how I got my first job on Upwork. I had a 4-portrait job with her. She had a bunch of books that she wanted done of all the various characters in her world, and she trusted me with very, very few reviews. It was probably one of the best experiences I've had with a client. I've had 2 clients that were really at the very top of my list, and I was very lucky to have one of them as my very first client on here. So don't be discouraged if you're not getting your proposals seen on here, if you're struggling to find work or that very first job on Upwork. Doing these little things and using what Upwork gives us to your advantage is going to help you get that very first job on here. Upwork is so forgiving with things like this. Their algorithm is so freelancer focused. They really, really want to help make freelancers feel like Upwork is a place that they want to be on. Try this out, see if it helps you, and definitely check out one of my other videos on Upwork and Fiverr and all these other freelancing sites. And I will see you guys in the next one.